Welcome to the Dr. Donna podcast, here on the Experience of the Soul podcast channel. Innovative, evidence-based recovery that helps to identify intergenerational trauma, allowing for freedom and embracement of the healing process. Today, episode 139, More on Trauma, Part 3. And now your host, Dr. Donna Bevan-Lee.
Hello, I'm Dr. Donna Bevan-Lee, and welcome to my podcast. Last time I put a little suggestion out there for everyone because I think this is just an interesting way to look at yourself and how you've developed resilience over your life. And that was to look back at traumatic events in your young life and think about your friends and what you did to go through those experiences and come out the other end. And also to give you tools to be able to go through other events that might be similar in your older life, but a lot about your relationships with your friends and people that were close to you, not your parents, okay, not your teachers, your friends, your peers. And so I thought I would talk a little bit about that today. I was thinking last night because I wanted to do this. It's kind of off the track a little bit of what I've talked about in the past. But I thought, okay, what were some of those events? You know, big traumas, little traumas. And, you know, a lot of time in my life, and this might have been true for people who were, you know, in my generation, or at least in that basic time, is that when I was young, we lived on farms and ranches. How we lived was, well, first we lived on my grandfather's farm. And, you know, the children, as soon as you were old enough to, say, walk around in the field, that for me, that was about 3, you were out with everybody else planting. And, you know, first thing you do is plant. The second thing you do is hoe weeds all summer. And the third thing you do is you reap. So you go out and pick whatever it is that and my grandfather had acres and acres and acres of land and was a huge producer of agricultural products. Also had a dairy farm. And he did have cattle, but he didn't really have a cattle ranch. That was my father's dream. So anyway, we would be out there and this might seem like a ridiculous trauma, but I was very young, say maybe 4. So my best friend at the time was my Uncle Jimmy. And my Uncle Jimmy was essentially the same age as I am. We went all through school together, same grade, married one of my best friends. That was kind of interesting. And he's not here with us anymore. He died. But I'm still in touch with his widowed wife and one of his sons. The other ones I don't really see very much. But anyway, so my Uncle Jimmy was my best friend. And he stayed my best friend until he died, essentially, because we grew up together. Anyway, so my Uncle Jimmy, though, boy, he caught the bug from my grandfather where, you know, he would do practical jokes on people. And so I remember one day when we were out, it was one of the first times that I was out in the field. So I might have been 3 even, but you know, he was 18 months older than me, but we still went through school together and we were best friends. So he was bigger at that time. And there's a big difference between a 3-year-old and a 4.5-year-old. Or if I was 4, he was 5.5. Anyway, we were out what you call picking up potatoes, is what we'd call that. And my grandpa, he'd be on the tractor, and he would drive through the fields of potatoes, and then we would follow and pick up all the potatoes. We'd pick them up and put them in our buckets. And, well, one day, while we were doing that, my Uncle Jimmy found a family of field mice. So what he did was he threw them into my bucket and freaked me out completely. Now, that may not sound like a really big trauma, but, I was little, and they started moving around and got out of the bucket because it was almost full and got on me, and I was very traumatic. I was very traumatized by that. And, I didn't realize the level of trauma I had until I was living out on the ranch that now me and my siblings own, that my parents owned, but we own now. I was living out there in the original house once. When I was older, I was an adult, and I was teaching special education at the time in the elementary schools around that ranching area that we live in. And if you ever lived on a ranch or a farm, you know that there are mice everywhere. They're in the field, they're in the house, they're under the house. You have cats. You gotta have cats. So we had cats, but in this little house that was original from the pioneers, there was no way, there were not enough cats to take care of the mice problem there. And so one morning when I got up bright and early, well, it wasn't bright, it was still dark because it was in the winter, but I'd get up at, say, 5 o'clock in the morning so I could be at the first school, which is about 30 miles away, in time to start the day, and also to help my dad feed the cows and take care of all that. So I was up early. I turned on the light, and there were 3 mice standing there looking at me in the kitchen. And I did this little squeak thing, whatever, and jumped up onto the cabinet. And I sat there, and they sat there. We had a little standoff because I kept saying, leave, go away. And they just stood there looking at me like, we're not going anywhere. And then I thought, okay, I'm sitting here on the kitchen cabinet. The mice are in control. And what's wrong with this picture? And then I flashed back to that day when we were in the field. And I realized that, geez, that was really scary to me. And it made me feel really, really afraid of mice, because here I am sitting up on this cabinet, and then there they are running my life. I know they're in here. And I thought, well, I don't really love that they're here, but I've got to get ready for work. So I got off the cabinet and just started thinking, I'm an adult now. See, now I started being in that present, right? In the moment. I'm an adult. These mice aren't going to hurt me. I don't like seeing them there, but I've just got to get an indoor cat, even if I'm really allergic. That's what I have to do. So I did get an indoor cat and took care of the situation. But, sometimes I'd find 2 or 3 dead mice in front of the door. So anyway, but I would tell you that it's like, I didn't want, one of the things about growing up on farms and ranches when you're a kid is that you're kind of alone. If you don't have siblings, you're all alone. There's no one to play with out there. I had 4 siblings, or 3 siblings. 4th didn't come along until a lot later. But when I'm around my siblings, we remember those things. We talk about those things. And as it happens, and I know this happens for everyone, as they continue to talk about those traumatic events, they start to have less and less of an impact. because you're not talking about them all the time. It's like you might just talk about them once in a blue moon. I mean, really, not talk about them very often. But, my best friends were my siblings and my Uncle Jimmy. And when we went back and lived on my grandfather's farm from the time I was in junior high until I graduated from high school. And during the time in between, there was just me and my siblings. We didn't really have friends because we weren't ever in one school long enough to make friends. And because my dad was a rodeo cowboy during rodeo season. And when rodeo season was over, he would go find a job either in a mine or in being a cattle ranch hand on the cattle ranch. And so I thought, okay, so what did we do then? Well, and what kind of traumas occurred? One big one that I do remember was we lived out on a reservation in Nevada. That was a Indian reservation. And one day, my dad worked in a mine. And one day, the sheriff came around and told us all that there was a brush fire moving towards the area that we lived in, and we needed to evacuate. So us kids were playing outside. We saw the fire. It was fairly near, and we were too little to really get that that's a problem. And so, but my parents rounded us all up and took us to the mine where my dad worked. And there were about 4 or 5 families. We were all in the mine, not like deep in the mine, but we were at the front of the mine, and we didn't understand what was going on. We just knew that suddenly everything that, it's like we were all gathered and went to the mine. And I remember that really well. And I remember being really alone in that. And so I never really talked about it because my siblings were too young to talk, really. I mean, I was 4, so they were 2, 2 and 1 and a brand new baby. So, yeah, no one to talk to. Parents didn't talk to kids then. And I just remembered feeling really alone and scared. And I had no idea why we had to stay in that mine for several days. It's like, why are we in this mine? And it was dark in there. So I didn't like that either. So, but then I remembered, so, I'm thinking out loud now and sharing some of my memories with you because we all have them, whether we know it or not. And I remember then that we're, back living with my grandparents for just a little while. So that would have been when I was about in the 5th grade. And we weren't there very long, but one day my Uncle Jimmy and I were walking to school together because we always did. And we saw, some other kids on our way to school, we would walk by one of our friends' house. Well, we weren't really friends, but we knew them and they were acquaintances, okay? I mean, we didn't play with them. But so we're walking by their house and we saw a bunch of kids in our class standing outside the house. And so we went over and said, hey, what are you guys doing? We're supposed to be going to school. And wow, something happened to so-and-so here. And we were just wondering what it is, and no one's talking about it. And so we stood there too, and we're all trying to figure out what's going on. Nobody knew. And I'm not really sure where the information came from, but after a while, we realized that we were going to be late for school, so off we went. And this is what happened. So we got in our classrooms, and over the intercom system, My brain's not working as well as I hope today. It's the smoke. Anyway, so over the intercom, we're sitting there. Back in those days, we would stand while the flag was going up, and then we'd say the Pledge of Allegiance. And when that was over, then they would have announcements. So the first announcement was so-and-so, and I'm not going to name his name, but so-and-so shot himself this morning in his house. And he's dead. And all of us kids kind of looked at each other like, wow. Jimmy, my best friend, he looked at me and I looked at him, and we both just got up and walked out of this room. And we were both kind of like, why did he shoot himself? I mean, we didn't even know enough. I think kids do these days, maybe, to say, did he shoot himself on purpose? Or did he accidentally shoot himself? And so we went over and asked his best friend, did he shoot himself on purpose? We didn't really understand that, but was like, why would you do that? And he didn't know. And we were all, all the kids kind of started talking amongst each other. And we didn't have any more information. We never got any more information. I would say that's a very poor way to handle a trauma with kids. And even to this day, there were other kids in the class that ended up being my friends later on in junior high and high school. And when I've brought that up, do you remember that day? Because we were all walking to school together, and some of them don't remember it. So I don't know if they didn't remember it because they didn't have the language to remember that or whatever. But my uncle and I, we talked about it a lot. And I'm really glad we did, even though it was all speculation. We had no more information than I just said. And you know what? One of the things that occurred, probably because we didn't really have very much information to start with, is that every time I was noticing, I remember, because I noticed things a lot then too, just like I do now, is that when we walked to school, because his house was on our way to school, we always walked on the other side of the street. Nobody ever walked on that side of the street. And when we go past his house, we kind of like slow down or stop and just look over there. We didn't know. We had no idea. So, but I think we got through that, at least Jimmy and I, by talking to each other. What do you think about that? I remember one of the things we did that day was we had these big poplar trees that farms and ranches are famous for in our front yard, Grandma's front yard. And we would climb those trees. And one of the things that we did that day is that Jimmy and I, when we got home and we did our homework, we went outside and we climbed up those trees, one of the trees, as high as we could, and planted ourselves in a space that we liked. And then we pretended that we were newscasters. We pretended that we were newscasters. And we do. Today, on our way to school, we found out that, so-and-so shot himself dead. So that was one of the ways that we dealt with it, is that we would tell each other how we felt and what the situation was. And then, one would go, and then the other would go, and then the other would go, and then the other would go. And we did that until we got tired of it. And basically, what we were doing is that we were processing that. We didn't know it at the time, obviously. But, children are resilient. They will find ways to come through situations. And they will act them out. If they don't have the words for it, they'll act it out. And that's what we were doing. So we were announcing to everybody what we knew and saying it over and over again. Finally, just kind of the energy went out. Still don't know what that was about. Anyway, so that was one. And another one that a lot of us remember who were in my generation was the duck and cover. Okay, we had duck and cover when I was in elementary school. And we didn't really understand very much about what that was about. It was before, when the big pigs happened, when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, we were doing duck and cover a lot. But even before then, because the nuclear weapons had just started to become reality for us anyway, we were very young. And so every now and again, over the intercom, I remember this time, over the intercom, we'd hear this siren. And what that meant was that we had to get under our desks, duck, and cover our heads, get underneath and get as small as we could and cover our heads. And that was going to save us from a nuclear bomb attack. I don't know why we were doing that, but we were. And it was just the siren, and then the teachers would get all like, okay, everybody, get under your desk and cover your head. And we weren't sure why we were doing that, but we certainly picked up the energy that whatever it was bad news. It had to do with bombs. We knew that. And it had to do with Russian bombs. We knew that. But that's all we knew. And, it was fairly traumatizing for us. I think that even though it's hard for me to believe that anybody who are adults would actually think that would help. I don't know. It baffles me now, but it was traumatic for us kids to do that because we thought bombs were coming and we weren't really sure what that would mean for us, but we thought bombs were coming and that there would be bombs flying. And if we got under our desks and cover our heads as well as we could, we'd be saved. And that was a big fat lie, it was a lie. Nobody survives that, especially not a direct hit, and certainly not if you're doing a duck and cover. So our friends, what we started to do, and like I said, kids will work this out one way or another, but doing these things with your friends when you're little, they help you more than if you're like isolated. So one of the things that my Uncle Jimmy and I did is that when we got back to Grandma's house after one of these events, we would try and figure out ways to really hide, right? And so being farm kids, some of the ways that we would really hide, which I'm going to share with you, and I know that you're going to think, oh my God, I can't believe you're still alive. Okay, I get that. One of the things we really did that we figured, whatever when those bombs come, these are the places we're going to go. So one of my favorites is that we pulled bales of hay out from underneath the haystack. We'd get underneath those and pull the hay bales back in. It's a miracle, I know, that we're still alive to talk about it. Because, for those of you who don't understand how haystacks work, is that you have these bales of hay that, our bales of hay weren't as big as some of the bales are now, but our bales of hay were probably about 3 feet wide, long, and maybe a foot deep, and they had, twine wrapped around to make the bed. So when you'd stack these into a haystack, you had to stack them a certain way. It's like one long way, and then the next would be the other way, and then the next would be the long way, and then the next. So, but when you're kids and you're pulling those out, you could actually cause the whole thing to fall on you, and then you would die. But we thought that would be a good way to avoid the bombs. Again, if nobody's telling you the facts in a loving way and letting you know that you'll be safe with them, you make it up as you go, like we did. And we also thought of crawling under the beds, which, of course, wasn't as dangerous. And then we made our own bomb shelter by going out in one of the back fields that had just been plowed and digging it as deep as we could. Then we put boards over it, and then we'd go underneath and say, okay, now we're going to be okay. So, what we did, Jimmy and I, was we figured out ways, we worked out ways to save ourselves. And while we were doing it, we're talking about the whole time. Well, what kind of bombs? What do you think? Where do you think they'll land? Well, and these were kids. Here we were, kids, trying to figure that out. And my Uncle Jimmy and I it seemed like we were trying to figure out life in many ways during many times. Then when we were confused, and most of these things were traumatic. We weren't generally trying to figure out how to carry books home from school. That wasn't traumatic. So we weren't talking, well, what do you think? We weren't doing that. But when we had a traumatic event, we would talk to each other. And that helped our friendship develop even deeper. And later in life, when I went to junior high and high school, I had other friends that we also developed those experiences. And while we're going through those experiences, we were able to get closer and to help each other get through it. This is called resilience. And I'm a pretty resilient adult myself. I mean, I can get through almost anything. I mean, I can think of a few things that might be more challenging, but I don't think about those things very often, just what I need to get through today. So what I want you to do is I want you to think about, okay, how did I go through that as a child? How did I get through that? How did I become resilient? And, one of the ways we did it was through our friendships. Even if we just had one friend, that's fine. We did it through our friendship. And think about that. And then think about who you could reach out now, who you could reach out to now. And in those times when you are traumatized, reach out to them. Reach out to your friends. Okay. Well, I hope that we can all have some more resilience, because I think we are needing it more and more each day, and not just focusing on the long-term traumatic events, but even if you have those, how can I get in the present and move forward now, today?
Thank you for listening to the Dr. Donna podcast here on the Experience of the Soul podcast channel. This channel is made possible because of listeners just like you. If you would like to support the channel with your tax-deductible contribution on an ongoing basis or through a one-time gift, head over to experienceofthesoul.com/support. The Dr. Donna podcast is copyright 2023 Dr. Donna Bevan-Lee, all rights reserved. Our theme music is composed by Dave Croft and used with permission. The Experience of the Soul podcast channel is a production of 818 Studios.
Hey friends, Sean here, your Experience of the Soul producer. I want to take a moment to tell you about something truly exciting. The SoulWorks online community, created by your host, Cynthia Alice Anderson, and available on the Mighty Networks app. If you're looking for a place where you can explore your spiritual path, connect with others, and grow in a meaningful way, then this is for you. SoulWorks is so much more than an online community. It's a safe, inclusive space for spiritual exploration, self-discovery, and personal transformation. Inside the community, you'll find everything from uplifting spiritual studies to soul-centered growth practices, meditations, affirmations, and so much more. It's a space where you'll always be supported and never judged. The best part, membership is free. You'll have access to powerful resources, inspiring content, and a supportive group of like-minded people who are all on their own unique spiritual journeys. And if you're ready to dive deeper, there are premium options available to enhance your experience with a live Monday night talk series and extended, deeper meditations. If you're seeking a place to connect, grow, and nurture your soul, we would love to have you join us in the SoulWorks community and see where this journey can take you. Visit my.soulworkscommunity.com today.